The UK has lauded Pakistan's fight against terrorism and its efforts for peace and stability in the region. It comes as UK's Commander Strategic Command General Patrick Nicholas Yardley Monrad Sanders called on Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa in Rawalpindi. Pakistan military's media wing said matters of mutual interest, including the Afghan peace process and defense cooperation, were also discussed during the meeting. The Israeli army says its fighter jets and helicopters carried out raids on Hamas positions in the Gaza Strip. In a statement, the army said the raids were in response to rocket fire from a Palestinian enclave. Hamas is yet to make a statement. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Turkey not to retain Russia's S-400 missile defense system. He was speaking to his Turkish counterpart on the sidelines of the NATO defense ministers' meeting in Brussels. Responding, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the purchase of the missile defense system is a done deal. And in Women's Champions League, Barcelona beat Manchester City 3-0 in the first leg of the quarter-final in Italy. The second leg will be played in Manchester on the 31st of March. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has called for addressing a global surge in Islamophobia and its devastating impact on Muslims. This comes on the 10th anniversary of the Human Rights Council's Resolution 1618 on combating religious intolerance. In a statement, the OIC said that COVID-19 pandemic has given rise to trends such as hate speech and hate crimes against Muslims. The bloc condemned the willful defamation of Islam and desecration of religious scriptures. The OIC stressed that free speech did not give a license to deliberately hurt sentiments of billions of Muslims. As the implementation mechanism of 1618 resolution, the OIC called the Istanbul process a useful platform for dialogue. It also welcomed Pakistan's announcement to host the next meeting of the Istanbul process in Islamabad. Brazil has reported record daily deaths from coronavirus as more than 3,200 people died overnight. Meanwhile, India has recorded this year's highest daily COVID-19 deaths with 275 fatalities. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.7 million lives and infected more than 124 million people so far. More in this report.
Vaccine problems, protests, and new restrictions this week has been difficult for governments with regard to COVID-19 after U.S. health experts publicly criticized AstraZeneca for using outdated information to show how well the immunization worked. The drug maker says it will publish up-to-date results from its major U.S. vaccine trial within 48 hours. But despite this criticism, Canada says the Oxford vaccine is safe and it will continue to be recommended for use. In Latin America, Brazil has reported record daily deaths from coronavirus as more than 3,200 people died overnight. However, amid WHO's warning of COVID-19 surging dangerously in Brazil and protests across the country against his handling of the outbreak, President Jair Bolsonaro defended his pandemic response.
The virus has arrived and it is being confronted by us, and it will soon pass. Our life must go on. Jobs should be kept. The livelihoods of the families should be kept. We should return to normality.
Europe seems to be shutting down again amid forlorn hopes of normalcy. Norway is introducing new national measures and will postpone the introduction of a plan to reopen society. Spain, however, will lift restrictions on arrivals from Britain on the 30th of March that have been in place since December. As the UK marked the first anniversary of the lockdown, Prime Minister Boris Johnson admitted the government's miscalculations about the virus.
The single biggest false assumption that we made was about the potential for asymptomatic transmission, and that did govern a lot of policy in the early days, or that misunderstanding about the reality of asymptomatic transmission certainly led to real problems.
Hong Kong authorities have suspended vaccinations with 2 batches of Pfizer's shot, citing defective packaging. In Australia, vaccine rollout experienced significant week 1 delivery errors, including a failure of shipments of needles to accompany the vials.
Pakistan says schools in coronavirus hotspot areas will remain closed till 11th of April. It comes as the country reported over 3,000 infections for the past 7 days. At a press conference, Federal Education Minister Shafqat Mahmood said the matriculation and intermediate exams will be held as per the schedule. However, he said the Cambridge authorities will be consulted for the postponement of the O-level exams. According to the Health Ministry, over 3,300 people contracted the virus overnight. It's 30 more people died from the coronavirus since yesterday, taking the toll to nearly 14,000. UK's Chief of Defence Staff General Nicholas Patrick Sanders has lauded Pakistan's fight against terrorism and its efforts for peace and stability in the region. He was meeting with Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa in Rawalpindi. The military's media wing said matters of mutual interests, including the Afghan peace process and defence cooperation, were also discussed. General Bajwa thanked the visiting dignitary and said that Pakistan Army greatly values its friendly relations with the UK. This is the second meeting between the two in under 1 month. The Indus River water sharing talks between Pakistan and India have resumed on their second and final day in New Delhi. It is the first meeting in 3 years of a commission that deals with water rights on the Indus River. Pakistan is concerned that India's plans for hydroelectric plants will disrupt the flow of the water supply to 80% of its irrigated agriculture. The talks were delayed due to India's unilateral decision to change the special status of occupied Kashmir. The Pakistani delegation is led by Indus Commissioner Syed Meher Ali Shah, while P.K. Saxena is leading the other side. The water sharing talks followed a rare military ceasefire agreement on the LOC. In Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, forces have launched more inhuman cordon and search operations in several areas of the territory. The occupying troops use the term cordon and search operations as a cover for its extrajudicial killings. Indian forces have cordoned off Lam and Bathnur areas of Pulwama district and are carrying out door-to-door searches. All communication networks, including mobiles and internet, have been cut. The witnesses say a large number of Indian occupying forces have been deployed in the areas. Meanwhile, a similar operation is underway in the districts of Srinagar, Baramulla, Budgam, Bandipur and Shopian. A giant container ship that turned sideways on Tuesday is still wedged across the Suez Canal, blocking traffic in one of the world's busiest trade routes. Dozens of vessels are stuck as rescue boats are working to free the 400-meter-long vessel, which was knocked off by strong winds. The Ever Given vessel was bound for Rotterdam in the Netherlands from China. Egypt reopened the canal's older channel to divert traffic amid fears it could remain blocked for days. Nearly 10% of the global trade passes through the Suez Canal, which provides the shortest sea link between Asia and Europe. According to reports, oil prices climbed as investors try to assess the impact on global crude flows after the blockage. The Israeli army says its fighter jets and helicopters carried out raids on Hamas's positions in the Gaza Strip. In a statement, it said the raids were in response to rocket fire from a Palestinian enclave. According to the local media, 2 sites of Hamas were struck by 5 missiles. Gaza is governed by the Hamas movement, but the enclave remains under a strict Israeli land, air and naval blockade. But Hamas is yet to make a statement. The Israeli raids came shortly after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Beersheba to gain voters as the country held its 4th election in less than 2 years. According to exit polls, Netanyahu has failed to win the majority needed to form a government. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Turkey not to retain Russia's S-400 missile defense system. He was speaking to his Turkish counterpart on the sidelines of the NATO defense ministers' meeting in Brussels. Responding, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the purchase of the missile defense system is a done deal. The two sides also discussed shared interests in Afghanistan, Syria, and the Eastern Mediterranean. They also agreed to hold more comprehensive talks in either Ankara or Washington. Turkey says it has neutralized 11 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria. The defense ministry says the fighters were attempting to infiltrate the area where Operation Peace Spring is being carried out. The ministry said Turkish commandos foiled the attempted attack by killing the militants. Peace Spring is one of the 3 military operations launched by Ankara in Syria since 2016. Ankara holds PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. In Russia, the lower house of the parliament has passed a bill allowing President Vladimir Putin to run for 2 more terms. 2 members of the State Duma submitted the bill to the lower house in November last year. Apart from resetting previous terms, the bill sets requirements for presidential nominees like a Russian citizenship and a minimum age of 35. The nominees must have permanently resided in Russia for at least 25 years and never had citizenship of another state. Last year, Russians had voted in favor of changes to the constitution that enabled Putin to stay in power up to 2036. The UN human rights body has agreed to set up a team to probe the use of force and torture by Belarusian authorities during the post-election crackdown. This comes after a 47-member Geneva forum adopted a resolution by the EU to probe the allegations. Earlier, Belarus envoy Yuri Ambrazevich rejected the resolution and termed it a destructive signal. But 20 votes were cast in favor, with 7 against, while 20 were abstentions. Speaking on behalf of the EU, Portugal's envoy said authorities in Belarus must hold the perpetrators to account for rights violations. Over 33,000 people in Belarus have been detained in a violent crackdown following a disputed election since last August. Myanmar's military has freed hundreds of demonstrators arrested during its brutal crackdown on protests. This comes after violence by the junta claimed its youngest victim, a 7-year-old girl. Witnesses say several buses full of prisoners drove out of Yangon's insane jail in the morning. Many businesses in the city remained shut and streets were deserted after activists called for a silent strike. The Assistance Association for Political Prisoners says at least 2,000 people have been arrested since the February 1 coup. The army has conceded the deaths of 164 protesters, including 9 security officers. But activists say at least 261 people have been killed so far. In Thailand, thousands of protesters have gathered in Bangkok to demand a reform of the monarchy and the release of jailed leaders. Protesters occupied one of the capital's busiest street intersections and called for the abolition of strict royal insult law. This comes days after one of the most violent demonstrations since they began last year. More than 30 civilians and police were injured in a clash at a protest near the palace last week. Criminal cases have been mounting against protest leaders, with many having been jailed and pending trial for insulting the royalty. The Thai youth-led political movement rose up last year to demand the premier's resignation and curbs to the monarchy. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. US President Joe Biden says he does not consider North Korea's launch of short-range missiles as a provocation. This comes after South Korea said Pyongyang fired 2 non-ballistic cruise missiles off the West Coast. Talking to the media in Washington, Biden said the Pentagon called the launch business as usual. Other officials of the Biden administration said the activity involved weapon systems at the low end of the spectrum. They said these missiles were not covered by the UN Security Council. The launch marks North Korea's first publicly known weapons test since Biden took office in January. The UN Human Rights Council has adopted a China-sponsored resolution on human rights cooperation. Beijing says Cuba, Russia, Eritrea and other countries voiced their support for the resolution at the meeting. Beijing's envoy to the UN, Shan Shu, said China's initiative is in line with the aspirations of the international community. The resolution is titled Promoting Mutually Beneficial Cooperation in the Field of Human Rights. It calls on states and stakeholders to engage in constructive dialogue based on impartiality, objectivity and mutual respect. It also emphasizes the need for active global cooperation to respond effectively to COVID-19 pandemic. Pakistan has urged the international community to work together to mitigate the simmering Rohingya crisis. Expressing grief over the deaths in the Rohingya campfire in Bangladesh, the Foreign Office said the incident is a sad reminder of the woes of Rohingya Muslims. At least 15 refugees were killed and over 500 others injured in the massive blaze that burnt around 10,000 shelters. The crowded camp currently houses 1.2 million Rohingya, most of whom have fled a crackdown by the Myanmar military in 2017. The incident came amid growing frustration among Rohingya refugees over the government's attempt to relocate them. Amid opposition by UN agencies, the government has relocated 14,000 people to the Basanchar island, which is prone to natural disasters. President Emmanuel Macron says France will reopen its embassy in the Libyan capital Tripoli on the 29th of March. He added, the move is to show support for the new Libyan authorities. Talking to media in Paris, Macron called for all foreign forces and fighters to leave Libya. He said Paris and its European partners were united in backing the ceasefire. He said France wishes to unify the national army, financial institutions, and work towards planned elections at the end of the year. Paris closed its embassy after evacuating 50 French and British nationals as fighting broke out in Tripoli in July 2014. Amnesty International has urged the International Criminal Court to investigate armed attacks by the Boko Haram in Nigeria's Borno state. In a statement, the rights group said the ICC must ensure those responsible are held accountable. Amnesty said the terrorists are also subjecting women and girls to rape and other sexual violence during their attacks. It expressed sorrow with the abandonment of the targeted communities by the security forces. The military's fight against the terrorists continues, which has killed thousands of people and displaced over 2 million in a decade. The US and Mexico have discussed ways to protect migrants amid the escalating border crisis. This comes after US President Joe Biden sent envoys to Mexico to seek help on the flow of the migrants. White House border coordinator Roberta Jacobson met Mexican Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard in Mexico City. In a statement, Mexico's foreign ministry said the talks aimed at mitigating the root causes of migration. It said the officials discussed different mechanisms for orderly and safe migration and protection of human rights.
This communication will continue. We have not reached a definitive point. It was not the objective of the meeting. The objective was to exchange points of view and information. I thank you for having visited our country, for having accepted this invitation from the Mexican government. I will continue to report on progress we are making. For the time being, good communication, increasingly better and closer relations between both countries.
Torrential rain and flash floods have claimed 2 lives in Australia. Wild weather in recent days has submerged houses, swept away livestock and cut off entire towns. Emergency services found the body of a Pakistani national in a car under 6 meters of water in Sydney's northwest. Media reported police found a second body in an upturned utility vehicle in floodwaters in Queensland state. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison toured flood-affected parts of Sydney on an Australian Defence Force helicopter, while New South Wales Premier warned that water levels would keep rising in some areas. UAE Finance Minister and the Deputy Ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum, has died aged 75. His brother and Dubai's ruler, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, announced his demise in a tweet. Dubai Media Office says funeral prayers will be restricted to family members due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Dubai has announced 10 days of mourning with government institutions to remain closed for 3 days. Sheikh Hamdan has served as UAE's finance minister since 1971. George Segal, the prolific actor with a career that spanned more than 6 decades, has died at age 87. In a statement, his family said the actor passed away due to complications from a bypass surgery. Segal was nominated for an Oscar for his role in Who's Afraid of Virginia's Woolf in 1966. By the 1970s, he often played ironic leading men in films such as The Duchess and The Dirtwater Fox. In the 90s, Segal became better known for television roles. He also excelled in comedic roles, most recently playing laid-back widower Albert Solomon on The Goldbergs. 2 individuals have found an unlikely friendship thanks to technology during the lockdowns around the world. Through Skype, a young Brit and old French woman have been in touch online for the past 6 months. More in this report.
For 98-year-old Jacqueline Tolu and 20-year-old Elliot Bellman, COVID-19 upset their lives, but also forged an unlikely friendship. Tolu has endured isolation in her care home near Paris, while for Bellman, the virus ruined his plans to be in France to study French. For the past 6 months, a scheme called Cher Ami that pairs elderly people with language students has been helpful for both of them.
I was nervous. Just meeting a new person, completely different generation, different culture, different language, obviously. So it's nerve-wracking. Thinking about maybe we don't get on, maybe she doesn't like me, maybe just like that generational gap would be too much because we've got such distinct views of political structures and cultures and so forth. But as soon as I started talking to her, she's very, as you'll see tomorrow, she's very easy to talk to. She's very funny. She just keeps the conversations going so easily.
On their weekly Monday call, Bellman dialed in from his bedroom in southern England, where he has been riding out the pandemic, while Tolu joined while sitting in a wheelchair at her care home in Bonneuil-sur-Marne. Tolu now has someone to talk to and relieve her loneliness, while Bellman has an opportunity to practice his French with a native speaker. But more importantly, they hit it off.
Oui, j'aime bien le lundi.
I said yes, I would like to speak to a young person. And at the same time, it will surely be of benefit for them to speak to me. And for me too, for my morale, and there you go. That's why I accepted it, as it would make me happy.
Tolu says their chats allow her, at least in her mind, to escape the confines of the care home for a little while every week.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. And now the business updates. The Wall Street stocks have rebounded as investors once again made bets on a strong economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The shares of cruise lines and airlines have also recovered some of the losses in the previous session. The S&P 500 index traded over 0.25% high, while DJI was also up nearly 1%. The Nasdaq Composite traded 0.5% lower at open. Meanwhile, oil prices surged as investors looked for bargains following the previous day's plunge. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.